Now, this afternoon we've got two pretty important keynote speakers. The first one is Deputy Grand Chief Ieyou Istchee from the Grand Council of Crees. Ieyou is the son of Matthew and Annie Iserhoff. He is a member of the Cree Nation of Mistissini, currently serving his second term as the Deputy Grand Chief of the Grand Council of the Crees and Vice Chairman of the Cree Regional Authority. Ieyou is also a member for the Hunting, Fishing, Trapping Coordination Committee and member of the JBACE Advisory Committee on the Environment. He is chairman of the Eeyou Communications Network, a non-profit telecommunications operation that provides broadband carrier services for the Cree communities of the Eeyou Istchee and the James Bay region. Please give him a warm welcome.
Jack. Nascom is Jimmy the Goods, suggestion I. Jimmy wishes you down at now, Darwin. Knows why I'm Betty Sweenan at now, Jibet Diatska. I'm not sure if there's translation for that. Maybe somebody can translate for me. Just kidding. Nascom, I'm very honored to be here today. We traveled a great distance to be here. It took us about 32 hours altogether to be here. So quite a distance to be in the air. Had a lot of time to think on a plane yesterday, and then we head back out tomorrow. So it's a very brief stop to be here with you guys, and I'm very honored to be here. I'm very nervous too. No, just kidding. We were asked to come and speak on behalf of the Grand Council of the Crees. I'm from a Cree community called Mistissini. It's one of the 10 communities that make up the Cree Nation in northern Quebec, Canada. First of all, I want to thank the people, on the traditional territory that we're on, for allowing us to gather here on their lands, the Larekia people, here on their lands for this very important occasion. I'd also like to thank those responsible for this wonderful event, and in particular the representatives of the Australian government who invited me here to be here today, and all those with vision and determination to launch the World Indigenous Network. You'll have to bear with me because about a week ago, I just came back from the bush. Every year, we take a few weeks out of our time to go out and hunt the Canadian goose as they come up to Eeyou Istchee. And at the same time, I don't think there's hardly a place in the world today that I can tell you that from my travels throughout the world, I've never been able to do this except back home. And we're very fortunate that we're still able to take a cup of water directly from the river. And we're still very blessed to be able to do that today. For many Crees, the hunt is a part of the natural food gathering cycle. For others tied to a desk job, like myself, we're fortunate enough as a modern and diverse Aboriginal society to still have the opportunity to live as our elders once did, even briefly, and amongst our busy schedules. Since arriving here in Darwin, I have had the privilege and honor to meet some of other delegates that are here. And I've been struck by the similarity of challenges that we all face with regard to conservation and stewardship. I'm inspired by the display of novel and imaginative ways that the Indigenous peoples are approaching the protection of their lands. Today, I would like to share with you the Cree experience on conservation and stewardship of our traditional lands, Eeyou Istchee. To begin, a little background on the Cree Nation of Eeyou Istchee. We call ourselves Eeyou, or Innu, which means the people. There are approximately 18,000 of us, with about 16,000 residing in our 10 Cree communities in Eeyou Istchee. We call our land in northern Quebec Eeyou Istchee, or the people's land. It covers some 400,000 square kilometers, that's 2/3 of the size of France. It includes the lakes and rivers that drain into the eastern James Bay and southern Hudson's Bay. Like Indigenous peoples' lands everywhere, Eeyou Istchee has provided for the Crees for thousands of years. This continues today, as at least 1/3 of the Cree continue to fish, hunt, and gather as their primary means of subsistence. This is why we consider all of Eeyou Istchee the lands and waters, the plants and animals, as being sacred. Like the Indigenous peoples here in Australia and around the world, water has always been critical to our existence. However, in the Crees case, the issue is not the scarcity of water. We are blessed with the abundance of water, so much as that water has become a constant in the development of our territory. Historically, water was the principal means of transport, supporting trade amongst the Crees themselves with our neighboring First Nations. In the 17th century, these transport routes founded the fur trade with Europeans, leading the discovery and exploration of our lands. Throughout the Crees' history, water has been a constant source of economic wealth. For much of the 20th century, our contact with the governments was sporadic because our location was remote. But in 1970, this changed when the government of Quebec proposed a massive 3-phased hydroelectric project that would dam most of the key river systems in Eeyou Istchee. This was all planned without the Crees' knowledge or consent. And so began a 40-year struggle for the Crees' self-autonomy. Our struggle took shape when 8 isolated Cree villages came together to form a collective nation under the Grand Council of the Crees. It was under the guidance of our elders to work together. Thus was formed the Grand Council, which successfully forced a legal injunction on the construction of the Phase 1 of the massive hydro project. The courts recognized the Crees' legal claim over our lands, and the governments of Canada and Quebec conceded to negotiate with the Crees over the terms of the hydro project. This resulted in Canada's first modern-day land claims treaty, the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, that was signed in 1975. I was probably a few months old when this agreement was signed. I was probably still in diapers back then. I was. I must mention that the Inuit people, whose lands to the north were also affected by the hydro project's partners in our opposition and were part of this historic agreement. Amongst the 30 chapters, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement set out 3 regimes: a special land regime granting the Crees exclusive and semi-exclusive rights to occupation, governance, and hunting and fishing in Eeyou Istchee; an environmental and social protection regime, the first of its kind in Canada, protecting the Crees' exclusive rights to use and occupy the land through the sustainable development of Eeyou Istchee's resources; and a hunting and fishing and trapping regime establishing the priority of Aboriginal harvesting and providing for the supervision and regulation of the territory's wildlife resources, including the training of Cree conservation officers. Other important features of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement were provisions allowing the Crees to set up their own education and healthcare systems and provisions for business development. With the signing of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement in 1975, the Crees believed that they were on course toward greater self-autonomy. Unfortunately, the governments of Canada and Quebec were only concerned about those provisions of the agreement that allowed them to move forward with their hydroelectric projects. They neglected to act on many of the provisions of the Crees' vision of the future promised by this agreement and was not materializing. This was the state of affairs for some 15 years after the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was signed. In the late 1980s, the government of Quebec initiated the second phase of the massive hydroelectric project. By signing the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the government assumed that the Crees had already provided their consent for all phases of the project, so long as the project was approved through an environmental and social impact assessment. Legally speaking, this may have been the case. But since the governments were not fulfilling their promises within the agreement, the Crees felt fully justified in opposing the second phase of this project, particularly since they were excluded from many of the economic benefits of the project. The Inuit had also come to the same conclusion, and they equally opposed the second phase of this project. The Cree and the Inuit opposition took the form of an international campaign squarely aimed at the American markets where Quebec's hydroelectricity would be sold. After an intense 5-year lobbying campaign, the Crees and Inuit managed to convince several American states, such as New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont, to withdraw billions of dollars in purchasing contracts with Quebec. The loss of these contracts sounded the death knell for this phase of Quebec's hydro project. By the end of the millennium, the government of Quebec was once again seeking to export more hydroelectricity to the United States. But this time, Quebec drew on the experience of having faced Cree and Inuit opposition on an international stage. The government proposed a new partnership agreement with the Crees that would address many of the broken promises of the past. In 2002, the Cree and the governments of Quebec signed a Pays de Brave agreement, which serves as an implementation agreement for the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. This marked a new beginning in the relationship between the Crees and the government of Quebec. The Pays de Brave agreement provides the Crees with an annual share of all present and future resource development activities in Eeyou Istchee, plus employment and training guarantees in future resource development in Eeyou Istchee. The Pays de Brave created a true partnership whereby the Crees were no longer bystanders in the development of their lands. This partnership did not come without a cost. In signing the Pays de Brave agreement, the Crees provided their consent for the partial diversion of the Rupert River for hydroelectric project development. However, this consent was exchanged for 3 new Cree-based protected areas totaling approximately 14,000 square kilometers, and a new progressive forestry regime that reduced the rate of logging in Eeyou Istchee by 50%. Most importantly, the Pays de Brave agreement provided recognition that all further hydroelectric development in Eeyou Istchee would be subject to Cree consent. Hopefully by this point you can see the progression that the Cree Nation have made towards greater autonomy over 400,000 square kilometers of land and water that make up Eeyou Istchee. To be clear, it has never been the Cree's intention to prevent all forms of resource development in our territory. On the contrary, our people do need jobs and economic benefits that come from natural resource exploitation. Remember, we were active participants, partners in the fur trade 3 decades ago, or 3 centuries ago, I should say. However, we are proponents of measured, balanced development in keeping with our long-standing tradition as proud stewards of the land. For example, in the intervening years between the world wars, Canada's iconic beaver was almost rendered extinct by the 3 centuries of exploitation and an invasion of war veterans seeking their fortunes in the trapping way of life. This led to famine amongst the Crees in Eeyou Istchee. To halt the extinction of the beaver and limit this famine, the government of Quebec created a 7,000 square mile beaver preserve in the heart of Eeyou Istchee, managed by the Crees. This was in 1930. By 1940, under the Crees' exclusive stewardship, beaver populations had recovered so well that the area was reopened to commercial trapping. This success prompted the Government of Canada to adopt this program, and a further 187,000 square kilometers of beaver preserves were created in Quebec and across Canada. I draw the past here to illuminate the future. Last year, the Cree Nation signed yet another agreement on regional governance with the Government of Quebec. This agreement marks the next chapter in the Cree's vision of self-governance. We have moved from essentially being treated as wards of the state to being managers of our small villages or reserves, to at least becoming full participants in the municipal governance of Eeyou Istchee. In assuming this role, the Crees have played an exclusive and semi-exclusive role in public land use planning and regional development as regional government officials, rather than passive stakeholders awaiting consultation for someone else's plan. Still, in its implementation phase, the new regional government agreement is already paying dividends. The youth of the Cree community of Mistissini, with the support of the Cree Nation, successfully lobbied for a moratorium on uranium mining development in Eeyou Istchee. In response to this, the Cree request, Quebec extended the moratorium to the entire province and call for public hearings on the uranium question. While these events were playing out, the Crees signed an impact benefit agreement with a company developing the province's first diamond mine. These recent events, in contrast, demonstrate our influence on deciding which resources will be developed in our territory, which will not be based on the long-term interests, of the Cree people. With this new chapter in the Crees developing self-autonomy and governance, the Grand Council of the Crees is moving from a reactive approach to land conservation and protection, responding to proposed and ongoing developments to a more proactive approach. As part of my portfolio, we oversee the development of a regional conservation strategy for all of Eeyou Istchee. And I'm accompanied by a few of our staff that are here today, Jeff Quayle, Shawn, Chris Beck. They're part of our team, and I thank them for being here also. Can you guys stand up so people know if they have any questions? There's Jeff over here. Chantel's way at the back on top. They work closely with my office on the protection file. As part of it covers 400,000 square kilometers. This strategy will be developed over time in accordance with the Crees' use and occupancy of the land, the priorities of Quebecers, and what science can tell us about biodiversity in this very vast territory. Right now, our most urgent conservation challenges are the most southern portions of Eeyou Istchee, close to main urban centers. Despite all the progress I have spoken about here, the southern portion of Eeyou Istchee, especially near the Cree community of Waswanipi, has been radically transformed by industrial development. A satellite image of this reveals a spiderweb-like network of tens of thousands of kilometers of forestry roads as an impenetrable primal forest have been cleared out. To address this transformation and forever preserve some of this region's remaining intact forests, the Cree communities of Waswanipi, Nemiska, Ojiboogamoo, Mistissini, and Waskaganish have come together in the support of the Broadback River Watershed Conservation Plan. The Broadback Watershed Conservation Plan is the first part of the Grand Council's conservation strategy for Eeyou Istchee. This plan is to preserve and conserve the watershed of the Broadback River by protecting the river itself as a core and establishing a network of carefully planned and managed buffer areas to insulate the core of natural resource development. The entire plan covers a total of 21,000 square kilometers, with 9,000 square kilometers devoted to permanent protection of the river's core. It is worth noting that the Broadback River, at 450 kilometers in length, was one of the key rivers that the government of Quebec targeted for hydroelectric development in 1970. In our efforts to preserve this river, protect this river, are successful, the Crees will have some full circle where we have started when the government unilaterally decided that this river should be dammed and diverted. This makes for a nice story, but we're not there yet. And this is one of the things that motivate us to be involved with the World Indigenous Network. We wanted to come here to learn and be inspired by the Indigenous peoples who are in similar positions with similar goals. For the Crees, the need to protect the Broadback River is obvious. As Chief Paul Gull from Waswanipi recently described, in Waswanipi's traditional territory, only the areas around Lake Evans and immediately north of the Broadback remain roadless, untouched by forestry development. Once these areas are gone, there'll be no place left in Waswanipi to show our children what the forest was once truly like when our elders thrived there. I'm sure with this kind of statement, that many of you, your youth, your leaders, or your elders have made about lands that your people consider sacred. It is unfortunate truth that we all share this reality. With the Broadback Watershed Conservation Plan, we are in direct competition with the forestry industry for the last remaining timber stands in this region. Innocent bystanders to this tug-of-war between protection and logging are the woodland caribou. This is a species that has been listed as endangered in Quebec and Canada. The scientific community indicates that the number one threat to woodland caribou is habitat disturbance and the loss through forestry development. Thus, the government of Quebec has an important decision to make, perhaps 10 years of further logging to keep its regional lumber mills operating in exchange for the remaining pockets of suitable woodland caribou habitat, not to mention the loss of Waswanipi Cree's cultural connection to fragments of forest untouched by roads and logging. At this juncture, with these choices, it seems clear that the past management of these resources has not been sustainable. Moving to the future, the Crees believe that it is time to build a new set of parameters around these choices. The Crees' vision of stewardship invokes the precautionary principle in favor of the natural world. First and foremost, Eeyou Istchee is our home, and we cannot let keystone species be eliminated for the sake of short-term economic benefits considerations, nor can we allow the last remaining stands of ancient forests to be logged out. I am proud to say that this vision that transcends from our elders down to the youth, in many ways, the Cree youth are most passionate about Cree stewardship values, as we recently witnessed the journey of Nishiyu walkers last winter. These were a few youth that walked from the community of Wamextu, some 1,600 kilometers from their community down to Ottawa. And it was an amazing arrival. There were literally over 1,000 people that met them when they arrived at the Canadian Parliament, because they wanted to be there and show the world and show Canada that Indigenous peoples, Aboriginal peoples' voice needed to be heard at all times and in all places, because we are talking about the future, their future. Major decisions that we make today have an impact on them, that they will be taking the lead later on in life, either in government or in wherever they're going to be when they're younger or older. It's important to note that this journey inspired many people throughout Eeyou Istchee, that the Cree Nation still continues today to speak of our culture and do a lot of the stuff that we talk about. We still practice. We still go hunt. We still trap. We still speak Cree. And this journey had an immense impact on everyone that was involved and saw what happened throughout those few weeks. Mistissini nuninaskmon ejimiubichi jidanot na pshi jidbab stadagut danagot steat jidit seit meg adant now mesknau ebmtek asko aimen koitskuts boninano dan hewit steak jignatum jano Eeyou. In closing, I want to say, as Indigenous peoples, we have come a long way. We have struggled along the way. I want to encourage the Indigenous peoples here today that sometimes we may think that the roads that we're walking on, it's impossible to reach our goals on the work that we're doing. I want to encourage you, don't ever give up on protecting our way of life, protecting who we are as Indigenous peoples. We have a special role to play in this world. As I was flying here, some 32 hours in a plane, it's literally a very small planet. We all have something in common. We're all human beings. We have a responsibility to make sure that decisions that we make here today don't have a negative impact on future generations, because future generations want to have exactly what we're doing here today. The freedom to go out hunt, the freedom to drink water directly from our water systems. So wherever you are as an Indigenous person, whichever organization you're part of, whether you're part of government, I want to encourage you, listen to the Indigenous peoples, because we have a very important role. We live off that land. We live what many people only can dream of. Again, Mistissini nunaskum don't. Jason in Stinanotska. Such a book shame no, but big check. Did you get milk? Did you good my check? Get you eat sick? Then you should good magic on Jish and do that. Again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. And I look forward to networking with many of you here today. Thank you very much. Naskum Nomsha, Sam Shambhala.